Joining me now on set is Victorian Labor Senator Kimberley Kitching. Thanks for joining us, Kimberley.
It's good to be here, see your Adelaide Crows mug in person.
Indeed, indeed. You Essendon supporters would love that. Now, let's get to your state colleague there, Jill Hennessy, the Labor Attorney-General for Victoria. Is she going too far, trying to strip Bettina Arndt of her award?
Well, I think that everyone can have an opinion. Politicians can obviously...
Can I just interrupt? Sorry, I know it's very early on, but we can all have our opinions. She's the Attorney-General of the state of Victoria and she's trying to have her stripped of the award.
Well, I think it's a very rigorous process. I've actually, on the Senate Finance and Public Administration Committee, we did an inquiry into government-owned assets, so including Yarralumla, where the award team is based. That is, it's a very rigorous process and it was very good to see it. So I don't think we want to politicise a process. I think probably Australians have seen enough politicisation of, processes that should be independent, like the sports grants, and I think that it should remain with what is a very thorough process, an examination, a due diligence on the award recipients, and I think that it should be left at that process. It should be the decision for the council that decides on those awards. So
Jill Hennessy, the Attorney-General, is wrong?
Well, I just think that look, everyone can have their view. Some people really love Bettina Arndt. She's less popular with some people. I think that if she's gone through that process and received an award, I can assure you it's a rigorous process.
So would you call on your colleague, the Attorney-General, to withdraw her complaints and let it ride?
I think that, my view is that she can have a view, I can have a view. My view would be in favour of the process. I think that, we can leave it there.
OK, well, yeah, let's move on. There's lots more to talk about. The government's response to the coronavirus, a very difficult issue, reopening Christmas Island, trying to get Australians out of China to that quarantine facility. Are you happy with the government's approach to all this so far?
The government has the opposition's full support. We all want to see Australians safe. We want them home if it's possible. Obviously, there's been 2 cases diagnosed in Melbourne. And of course, in Australia, we are very lucky that we've got the Peter Doherty Centre, which has managed to replicate the virus and which will enable much easier and more accurate testing to be done. So I think we should congratulate those scientists on doing that so quickly. They are the first lab outside of China to do that. So I think, props to them. We are very lucky to have them. I think, I've been a bit of a critic of the Chinese government on occasion, but I think in this case they've really learnt from their experience with SARS and they've been much more open and much more disclosive this time around and certainly notified the World Health Organisation much, much earlier than they did with SARS. So I think that's, that's a real positive as well, I think. And I would say, Chris, I think this unites... I don't think this is a partisan issue. This unites all Australians and I think unites people around the world. I mean, we all want people to be healthy and not to suffer from this virus.
We're all equal according to the virus itself. Just very briefly on that, some people are saying it's terrible to send people to Christmas Island for quarantine. Isn't that the perfect location for this sort of process?
I mean, obviously the ones who have already returned to Australia are in Australia, they're isolated or they're isolated at home. Look, if the government, that is up to the government. They've obviously received briefings from the Chief Medical Officer. That's the government's call if they're doing that. They're obviously privy to briefings that we don't have. But, if that's their view to isolate people, they have the opposition's full support to make the Australian community as safe as it can be.
Now, just briefly, you mentioned you've been a critic of China. The UK now allowing Chinese company HUAWEI into its 5G establishment, something that America and Australia have rejected. Are you worried now that our Five Eyes intelligence sharing with the UK and, of course, the US, Canada and Australia is now in jeopardy?
Look, I think the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who's just arrived in London, probably it's a great disappointment that the UK has made this decision. They are obviously within the Conservative Party in the UK experiencing a bit of a backbench revolt, and in fact senior Tories have said, we really don't want to do this. How has it come to this, that we're really reliant on HUAWEI as to be a provider? Our intelligence agencies are first rate. They're so professional. We rely on their advice around, firstly around the ban of HUAWEI into the NBN, and certainly the ban of HUAWEI into the 5G, the Australian 5G network. And if I can get a bit techie, I think that there's a view that in the UK that you could separate out the core from the edge of the 5G network. But of course, there's a view that really you can't do that. The 5G network per se is an integrated system. It's an integrated network, and therefore it's going to be very difficult to keep HUAWEI just as they've said that they would, just on the edge, on the periphery of the network. There's a view that that is not actually going to be possible. And once you've got someone in, I think that the Conservative MP Tom Tugendhat, who's likely to reprise his role as a Foreign Affairs Committee Chair of the Commons, he has said, there's no point in leaving Brussels only to hand control over to Beijing. And I think he expresses a widely held concern.
Right, just one other issue I want to get your thoughts on. I know you are in Sydney today as a Senate committee looking at this new proposal to ban cash transactions above or $10,000 or above. Is this going to fly, or are a lot of people resisting it?
I think a lot of people are resisting it. So the government is proposing that cash transactions over $10,000 will be a criminal offence. So there's up to 2 years jail.
A lot of people love dealing in cash.
They do, and there's a lot of Australians who do, for no illicit purpose, they do pay for things in cash. And I think, they haven't even managed to convince their own party. The Victorian State Liberal Council meeting earlier this week, 95% of that body condemned this legislation. As a party that believes in the rights of the individual, they are expressing a great deal of concern. So, in fact, the Treasurer and the Assistant Treasurer have not even, been able to convince their own state branch of the Liberal Party that this is good legislation. So I don't know where that leaves the rest of us. And I think, there is a concern. This is legal tender. It's not like, we're dealing cash is legal tender.
Yeah, we all want to stop, drug dealers and tax cheats, but if people illegally have $10,000 cash and want to use it for all sorts of reasons, even just to escape the levy of using a credit card, then perhaps they've got an argument. Yeah,
so I think we'll see how it goes, and the report is due into the Senate next week. So we'll have a look at that, and obviously there'll be many parties contributing to that, including the crossbench in the Senate. So the government would need to probably have some discussions with them, but I actually think they should withdraw this legislation.